There comes a moment in every person's life when the silence becomes louder than the noise, when no amount of applause or distraction, no external validation or opportunity can drown out a single truth. You were never missing anything. You just forgot who you are. You weren't made to chase permission. You were designed to carry power, not because of what the world gave you, but because of what was placed inside of you before the world ever knew your name. Most people aren't lost. They're simply disconnected, walking around with empty hands, not because there's nothing to hold, but because they've been taught to look everywhere else except within. They wait, they hesitate, they convince themselves that someday, someone, something will make it all click. But the longer they wait, the quieter their inner voice becomes, until one day, that silence speaks louder than the noise, and it says, "Stop crawling through life as if you were powerless. Stop rehearsing the lie that you need more time, more approval, more clarity. You don't. You just need to remember. Remember what Napoleon Hill taught, that the only limitations you have are the ones you accept, that the door you're waiting to be opened will never unlock, because it was never locked to begin with. It was yours to walk through the moment you decided to stop doubting and start moving. You've been trained to depend on things outside of you, plans, logic, resources, opinions, approval, but none of those will ever activate your purpose. Because your purpose doesn't answer to fear, it answers to decision. And decision only shows up when you stop looking for signs and start becoming one. The moment you stop asking, "Am I ready?" and instead declare, "I've been ready all along," that's when everything changes. Because truth doesn't need confirmation. It just needs alignment. And that's what this moment is. It's not an accident. It's not inspiration. It's a reminder that deep within you is something eternal. Not a wish, not a fleeting dream, but a presence. A voice that doesn't yell. A power that doesn't force. A flame that never went out, only got buried under layers of noise, doubt, and waiting. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to beg to be seen. You don't need to perform to be worthy. You need to realign. Because once your mind and your steps agree, once your faith and your action lock into place, once your purpose is no longer a question, but a command, then the world has no choice but to respond. You were never abandoned. You were never broken. You were simply distracted. Now is the moment you return to who you were always meant to be. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel strong. Now. There comes a shift inside a man when he realizes that he no longer needs to be chosen, because he already was. He doesn't need someone else's blessing, title, or confirmation. He doesn't need the room to agree before he speaks. He walks into the room with a presence that declares, "I know why I'm here." This is the power that Napoleon Hill described when he spoke of definiteness of purpose. A man without it drifts, waiting for the wind to decide his direction. But a man with it, he commands the wind. He doesn't wait for the green light. He becomes it. He doesn't ask, "Am I allowed to rise?" He rises because something within him has already said yes. You see, there is a strength that doesn't scream, a clarity that doesn't demand attention. It lives in the eyes. It shows up in the walk. It breathes through the silence. And that kind of strength only emerges when you stop trying to be ready and decide to be available. God doesn't wait for perfect men. He moves through available ones, through those who say, "I don't have all the answers, but I refuse to stay still another day." That's when divine power begins to flow. Not because you manipulated it, but because you finally got out of its way. That's what happens when a man obeys the quiet voice inside, not the voice of fear, not the voice of culture, but the whisper that's been repeating the same thing for years. Go. Even if your knees shake, go. You weren't designed to chase miracles. You were designed to become one. But miracles don't manifest through hesitation. They respond to movement. Every time you move in obedience, not because of how you feel, but because of what you believe, you unlock new levels of favor, clarity, and alignment. That's the faith Napoleon Hill talked about. Not passive belief, but faith in action. Faith that walks while the fog is still thick. Faith that speaks when the voice is still trembling. Faith that persists when the applause is gone and no one is watching. Because make no mistake, the world doesn't reward those who wait forever. It rewards those who align and move. And alignment is not magic. It's coherence. It's when your thoughts, your words, and your steps are all saying the same thing. I know who I am. I know who sent me. And I'm done playing small. This is when the shift begins. When your walk carries weight. When your silence carries presence. When your decisions are no longer reactions, they are revelations. And the man who moves like that, he doesn't need to raise his voice. He doesn't need to outshine others. He shines by being aligned, by remembering what most have forgotten, that he was never created to impress. He was created to impact. And impact doesn't start with applause. It starts in the private moments, the ones where no one's looking, but you choose to move anyway. Not because you feel ready, but because you've stopped waiting for permission. Now you understand. You're not lost. You're not late. You're right on time. The moment you decide to become what you were created to be. If you're honest, you've felt it. Not in the middle of the noise, not in the rush of deadlines, applause, or achievement, but in the stillness, in those rare moments where you paused and something inside you whispered, "This isn't all there is. I was made for something more." That whisper, that wasn't anxiety, that wasn't doubt, that was truth rising up through the silence. It was the reminder that what you've been looking for outside has always lived inside. Not in the next podcast, not in the next mentor, not in the next opportunity, in you. But the problem is, your life is too loud. You've filled it with too many voices, too many opinions, too many routines that suffocate the soul. You've allowed your attention, your most sacred tool, to be divided across endless distractions. And what Napoleon Hill warned about is now happening. Your mind has become a battlefield. Not because of your limitations, but because of your lack of focus. You've given your energy to what doesn't build you. You've let your emotions be shaped by what doesn't align with your calling. And you wonder why clarity doesn't come, why peace feels out of reach, why purpose feels distant. But here's the truth. Clarity was never absent. You just buried it. Under the weight of urgency, under the noise of notifications, under the pressure to look like you have it all together. But now the whisper is rising again. And this time, it won't be silenced. Because you're not meant to live in confusion. You were created to live in intention. You were designed with a mind capable of directing your destiny. A mind that listens when properly trained. A mind that bends to auto-suggestion. The repetition of truths that reshape your identity from the inside out. Napoleon Hill didn't just teach belief. He taught mastery, the conscious training of the subconscious until it obeys your vision, not your fears. And that training doesn't begin in a crowd. It begins in silence. It begins when you take back control of your attention, because the mind, left undirected, becomes a prisoner. But the mind, when focused, becomes a weapon of destiny. This is the moment you stop letting your thoughts wander wherever they want. This is where you take back the wheel. You stop repeating weakness. You stop reinforcing limitation. And you begin to speak what is true, even if it doesn't feel real yet. I carry power. I walk in purpose. I was born to lead. I'm done doubting who God made me to be. These aren't affirmations. They are instructions to your own mind. And your mind will believe what you repeatedly tell it, especially when it's spoken with conviction. So let your words become weapons. Let your silence become sacred. Let your focus become ferocious. You don't need louder motivation. You need fewer distractions. You need to declutter your mental space until all that remains is what's aligned with your calling. And once you clear the noise, once you reclaim your attention, that buried power, it rises. Not because it was newly created, but because you finally stopped hiding it under a life that wasn't meant for you. You don't need to feel powerful. You need to choose thoughts that restore power. You need to master your mind, because the world won't hand you clarity. You'll have to create it, and it begins here, with attention, with decision, with command. There's a moment where inspiration is no longer enough, where motivation doesn't move you like it once did, where you're not looking for another emotional high, you're looking for instruction. You don't want to feel empowered. You want to walk in power. And that begins when you stop asking for the feeling and start practicing the obedience. That's the turning point, the moment that separates the inspired from the aligned. Because feelings are fragile, but obedience is foundational. Napoleon Hill said that persistence backed by purpose creates an unstoppable force. But persistence doesn't come from waiting for perfect conditions. It's born when a man decides that he no longer needs to understand everything in order to move. Because power doesn't answer to emotion, it answers to decision. It activates when you walk, even with shaking hands, even with doubt whispering behind you, even with fear still present. And you know what happens when you obey that inner whisper? The universe responds, not out of pity, out of respect, because divine power doesn't move on demand. It moves when you align. You don't activate heaven by begging. You activate it by moving, as if it's already backing you. This is not about arrogance. It's about alignment. It's about saying to yourself, I don't need the world to see it yet. I just need to walk like I believe it. When you do that, something changes. The atmosphere around you bends. The energy you carry shifts. People don't know why, but they feel the weight of your presence. Because you're no longer leaking power. You're walking in contained, focused conviction. That's what faith in action looks like. It's not loud. It's not always pretty, but it's undeniable. And that's the kind of man the world can't ignore. Not because he demands attention, but because everything about him whispers, I'm not hoping I've been called. I know I have. Let that be your language now. Let that be the rhythm of your day. I don't have to feel it. I've decided to live it. Because feelings fade. But aligned decisions compound. They build momentum. They build legacy. They build a man the world begins to watch. Not because he tries to be seen, but because he's too deeply aligned with purpose to be invisible. This is why you must stop depending on how you feel. Stop negotiating with fear. Stop asking for another sign. You are the sign. You are the proof. You are the movement. You are the permission others are waiting for. But none of it means anything until you decide to move, even if it's small, even if it's quiet, even if no one notices at first, because every step you take from this alignment sends a signal to your future, to your subconscious, to heaven itself. And that signal says, I'm not available for average anymore. So take the step, and then the next, and don't stop. Not when it gets hard, not when it gets quiet, not when doubt shows up in the shadows. Because persistence is not about energy. It's about decision repeated in silence. And silence is sacred, because it's in that silence that God moves loudest. Not with thunder, but with direction. There's a weight that follows a man who walks in alignment. Not a burden, but a presence. He doesn't announce it. He doesn't need to. His silence says everything. He doesn't chase attention. He doesn't need to prove anything. Because when you know who walks with you, you no longer walk for the world. You walk from a higher source. Napoleon Hill called it definiteness of purpose. But it's more than direction. It's identity. It's the deep, unshakable awareness that your steps matter. That you're not just moving through life. You're moving with assignment. When a man lives like that, he doesn't force anything. He flows. Not because the world is easy, but because he is anchored. His voice may be quiet, but when he speaks, people listen. Not because he's loud, but because there's substance in his words. They're not reactions, they're revelations. They carry direction, not noise. And that kind of presence can only be built in private, in the quiet decisions, in the moments when no one is watching, when you choose to discipline your mind, to master your emotions, to guard your energy like it's sacred, because it is. This is what separates the aligned from the distracted. The aligned know your thoughts are not neutral. Your attention is not casual. Every moment spent out of focus is a moment you've delayed your own destiny. So the man who walks with God within him, he protects his mental state like a warrior protects the gates of a city. He doesn't let just anything in. He doesn't entertain every conversation. He doesn't absorb every opinion, because he knows clarity requires consecration, and peace requires discipline. He's not trying to be impressive. He's trying to be intentional. That's why his schedule looks different. That's why his habits are sacred. That's why his yes means yes, and his no doesn't tremble. Not out of pride, out of responsibility. He's carrying something divine, and he refuses to leak power by living like he's average. This is what Napoleon Hill meant by controlled attention and definiteness, backed by faith. The power of a man is not found in how much he can hold. It's in how clearly he knows what to let go. The aligned man lives light, but walks heavy, because what he carries can't be seen, but it's deeply felt. People don't always understand him, and that's okay. He's not here to be understood. He's here to become evidence that heaven isn't somewhere far away. It's already inside those who remember. So the next time you feel small, the next time the old doubts try to convince you that you're not enough, remember this: you don't need a sign. You are the sign. You are the proof. You are the reminder. And every step you take with faith, even the quiet ones, even the uncertain ones, even the trembling ones, they all say the same thing: God is within me, and I'm done walking like He's not. If the power inside you feels distant, if clarity feels hard to find, if peace feels like something you only visit but never stay in, it's not because God walked away. It's because your life is too full, not full of purpose, full of noise, full of opinions, full of obligations that feed the ego but starve the soul. Your mind wasn't created to carry 1,000 open tabs. Your spirit wasn't designed to process every voice around you. You weren't made to scroll past your own calling, numbing yourself with distractions that feel urgent but produce nothing eternal. Napoleon Hill warned us about this, that your subconscious mind is always listening, always watching, always collecting data, and what you feed it becomes what you believe. So if you constantly allow chaos in, don't be surprised when confusion becomes your default state. If you live in reaction mode, don't expect to feel guided. If your inputs are shallow, don't expect your spirit to feel deep. The presence of God is not gone. It's just buried. Buried under layers of noise, content, conversation, and compromise. You keep asking for direction, but direction can't speak where there's no space. You keep begging for clarity, but clarity doesn't shout, it whispers. And whispers can only be heard when the room gets quiet. So clean the room. Declutter your mind. Delete what doesn't align. End what doesn't edify. Protect your attention like it's oxygen, because it is. Fast from urgency. Fast from performance. Fast from the lie that you need to be everything to everyone. Because if you don't protect your power, it will scatter. Not because it's weak, but because it's sacred. Even Jesus withdrew to quiet places. Even the strongest leaders disappeared to recover their focus. Even the most powerful minds pause to recenter. So why are you still running without rhythm? Why are you still addicted to motion without meaning? This is your invitation to come back to center. Not for inspiration, but for alignment. not to impress, but to remember. Because your calling won't compete with the noise. Your inner wisdom won't scream for your attention. It waits for your silence. It waits for your availability. And once you offer that, the voice returns. The clarity sharpens. The fire that once felt distant starts rising again. Not because something new happened, but because you finally made space for what was always there. And once you taste that again, you'll stop tolerating the chaos that kept you numb. You'll stop excusing the noise that kept you disconnected. You'll stop calling distraction normal and start calling it what it really is: resistance to your own greatness. So here's the challenge. Don't just ask God to move. Make space for Him to land. Don't just hope for peace. Clear the battlefield of your mind. Don't just wish for clarity. Decide to cultivate it, because you already carry what you're asking for. You just need to stop crowding it out. When you do that, power returns. Not because it left, but because you finally remembered where it lives. You've been told that courage means waiting until the fear is gone. That strength means acting when everything feels certain. That confidence is the reward for clarity. But let me tell you something that breaks all that logic. Power doesn't show up when you feel ready. Power shows up when you move anyway. Napoleon Hill taught us that action is the bridge between the invisible and the visible, that faith is only real when it's backed by motion, and that the universe does not respond to hesitation, it responds to conviction. So if your knees shake, let them. If your voice trembles, speak anyway. If your mind doubts, override it with your decision. Because you can't wait your way into purpose. You walk your way into it, step by uncertain step. That's what separates those who watch miracles happen from those who become them. You're not missing anything. You're just avoiding the discomfort of stepping into the unknown. But what if I told you that the discomfort isn't a barrier? It's the doorway? That resistance you feel? It's not a warning sign. It's a signal that you've reached the edge of your old self. And now, the only thing left is this: obedience. Not obedience to fear, not obedience to logic, but obedience to the deeper voice, the one that's always been speaking, even when you tried to ignore it. You know the one I'm talking about? It's the voice that speaks without shouting, the one that doesn't argue. It simply repeats: go, build, speak, move. You keep waiting for your confidence to rise. But confidence doesn't come before obedience. It follows it. And every time you delay, every time you tell yourself, I'm not ready, every time you choose comfort over calling, you're teaching your mind to value safety more than purpose. And you're silencing the voice that was meant to guide you. Napoleon Hill warned of this, that indecision breeds doubt, and doubt breeds fear. And once fear takes root, it paralyzes. So here's the new strategy. Don't argue with fear. Outrun it, outmove it, outcommit it. You don't defeat fear by studying it. You defeat fear by acting while it's still talking. Because obedience isn't about waiting for silence. It's about deciding who you're going to listen to. And every time you choose obedience over hesitation, you send a signal to your subconscious. I trust what's in me more than what's around me. I believe the voice within more than the noise without. I don't need a perfect feeling. I need a powerful decision. This is where transformation lives. Not in the comfort zone, not in another theory, not in waiting for all the lights to turn green. It lives in the moment where you step out without knowing how everything will work out, but trusting that heaven moves with you as you go. So walk, even if you're not sure. Speak, even if it shakes. Build, even if the plan isn't perfect. Because the longer you wait, the colder your calling becomes, and the quieter that divine whisper gets. But the moment you take that next step, the whisper turns into a wind behind you. Not because God suddenly showed up, but because you finally stopped holding back. When a man walks in alignment with his divine assignment, He stops chasing things that were never designed to be pursued. He becomes magnetic, not because he's trying to impress, but because his presence is now undeniable. You don't need to run after everything when your energy starts speaking louder than your words. You don't need to force doors open when your walk becomes an invitation to destiny itself. Napoleon Hill called this applied faith with definiteness of purpose. When a person knows who they are, why they're here, and what they will no longer tolerate, the universe begins to reorganize around that clarity. People begin to notice. Opportunities begin to recognize you. But more importantly, you begin to see yourself differently. Not as someone trying to become powerful, but as someone who finally remembered they already are. And that's when things start shifting. Not because the world suddenly got easier, but because you became undeniably focused. You began to walk like someone who knows who sent them. You began to speak like someone who isn't asking anymore. They're declaring. You didn't get louder. You got deeper. You didn't become more visible. You became more anchored. And this anchoring does something the world can't explain. It calms the chaos. It silences the critics. It breaks the illusion that you ever needed permission to begin. Because now, when you enter a space, the atmosphere changes, not because of the clothes you wear or the way you talk, but because your alignment has a weight of its own. You don't have to speak first. Your stillness speaks. You don't have to convince. Your eyes carry truth. You don't have to dominate. Your silence creates space. This is the kind of leadership Hill called the invisible force of success. It's not loud. It's not theatrical. It's not for show. It's the quiet conviction of a person who has come into agreement with their own soul. So if you still feel the urge to prove, let it go. If you still feel the need to be validated, detach. If you still carry the habit of reaching for attention, shift inward. Because the man who is truly aligned isn't searching. He's building. He doesn't run from silence. He uses it as his strength. He doesn't panic in delays. He understands that divine timing respects bold obedience. So what does this mean for you now? It means the season of running after things is over. You've paid the price of misalignment long enough. You've diluted your energy for too many people and bent your path for too many opinions. Now is the season to walk with clarity, to let your consistency become your voice, to let your conviction speak louder than your explanation, to let your alignment do the attracting. Because when your faith is fused with action and your soul is fused with purpose, you don't chase your future, you meet it. Essa parte aprofunda a ideia de magnetismo espiritual e autoridade silenciosa. Ensinamentos que Hill traduziu em termos como autossugestão aplicada, vibração interior e fé combinada com propósito definido. You've looked for signs. You've waited for the right moment. You've prayed for clarity, for certainty, for the feeling that says, now I can begin. But let me say this with all the clarity your soul has been craving. You were never waiting for a sign. You were meant to become one. You are not here to blend in. You are not here to get by. You were sent here to ignite, to build, to reveal what happens when a man aligns his mind, his spirit, and his steps with divine intention. That's what Napoleon Hill taught. That success is not reserved for the lucky or the loud. It belongs to the one who decides, the one who persists, the one who moves while still afraid, the one who trusts the invisible more than the opinions of the crowd. That one is you. The difference now is that you remember. And when a man remembers who he is, he stops apologizing for his power. He stops performing for acceptance. He stops doubting the assignment stamped on his soul before he ever took his first breath. You don't need to explain it. Your presence will confirm it. You don't need to defend it. Your results will prove it. You don't need to rush it. Your alignment is already shifting the atmosphere around you. So walk. Walk like someone who's already been sent. Speak like someone who carries something eternal. Move like someone who no longer needs permission, because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more clarity. It needs more presence. It needs men and women who live in such deep connection with their purpose that their silence carries more weight than someone else's scream. That can be you, starting now, not because you feel worthy, but because you were chosen, not because you're perfect, but because you're available, not because it's easy, but because you're done, living small. So, take the next step, even if your hands still shake, even if your heart still races, even if you don't know what happens after that. Take it, because what meets you on the other side is not just momentum, it's confirmation, it's alignment, it's the favor that follows those who walk not by sight, but by faith in what they carry. And you carry more than emotion, more than ideas, more than potential. You carry the evidence that the divine still lives in men. You carry the proof that power doesn't have to shout. It only needs to be remembered. So, walk. Because from this point forward, you don't need signs. You are the sign. You are the signal. You are the permission someone else is waiting for. And you become that, not when you talk about it, not when you hope for it, but when you walk in it, with silence, with fire, with purpose, with presence. Let that presence speak now. Let your life become the message. Let the next step declare, I am no longer waiting. I'm already walking.